Today we are talking with Valerii Kur, head of the Department for Disorganized Crime. A person who knows dozens of insiders. Valerii Stepanovich, I am glad to welcome you. Good morning. I suggest that we talk to you about the situation in the Kursk region, about what is happening in Russia now. Because I know you have something to say. But before we begin, we traditionally return to our audience. Please like this video now. If you don't like it, you will remove it at the end. Also write a comment right now, where you are looking at, your place, your country. We see everything, read everything. And subscribe to this YouTube channel, because, yes, the messages that we are going to discuss now, they will be heard by as many people as possible, and this is definitely important during the information war. I want to hear your analysis of these events. What is happening there now, your versions, and here is the main thing. How will these events develop further? I am very calm about this phenomenon. You, respected and disrespected Russians, together with Putin, asked for war, you got it. You asked for a buffer zone, and we are creating it. Our valiant boys and girls today know how to do it. But what is most interesting, my point of view and personal attitude. I want to warn everyone that everything I will talk about is solely my personal opinion. That is, my personal opinion is not related to any commercial or state interests. I want to speak for myself. So, I think that in Russia, unlike those so-called liberals who talk more and play along with Putin, and you probably know who I'm talking about, and we'll talk about them later, these young men, guys, men have taken up arms to defend their freedom. I think that they are regaining what belongs to the people, and not to Putin's elite, including the so-called military. I don't think we have an interest in going deep into Russia. This is a normal tactical system not only to deter the enemy, but today it is very difficult for us, because the enemy is throwing meat on all fronts. Я не думаю, что это вот у нас прям такой интерес зайти вглубь России. Это нормальная тактическая система, не только сдерживания врага, а нам сегодня очень тяжело и трудно, потому что он бросает мясо по всем фронтам. But this is still a certain trick of strategic long-term thinking at the moment. Стратегического далекого мышления на сегодняшний момент. At the moment, the leadership of our army, our state, with the help of our friends who help us, they help us very well. With intelligence, we manage not only to pull the enemy away, but at the same time to check who is really defending the borders there. How did you start the war, Putin, if you have a hole here? You create problems for us, civilians. Therefore, it is very convenient for us that certain forces in Russian society have taken up arms and are helping us to create this buffer zone, to protect the northern regions of our Ukraine. You remember that every day, without fail, these bombers are raised, these bombers that are launched from afar and start bombing. These attacks, although very stupid, still cause damage to the civilian population. Therefore, let's treat this as a normal course. There is no need for special enthusiasm. We strike the enemy where we see fit. Today, absolutely all those who started the war are legitimate targets. And if he even strikes us from the territory of the Kursk Independent Republic, you have seen, there is already humor. Instead of the sign of Kursk, there is already our sign with Ukrainian symbols. That is, of course, this is a laughing stock of Putin, of his great army, the second army of the world. But at the same time it is a good factual groundwork. We show that we can wage war, not you, and we stopped waging it back in the summer of 2022. That's where our army broke your back, and now our friends, colleagues and comrades in arms, I mean Western countries, are helping us to a greater extent with information. Yes, well done for supplying us with weapons, and we are beginning, as the strongest army in Europe, to show that we are really the strongest, but taking into account, first of all, the savings of our own strength. Therefore, let's assume that Gerasimov reported this round scarecrow to Putin. But you and we see everything, and I think that the Russians understand that this is a bluff. We stopped the breakthrough and finished it off, but we understand that this is a bluff, which means that they are afraid of us, which means that they continue to deceive. I don't think Putin is hysterical. Putin, as a very base creature, is a synthetic product, and you know, it reminds me of a smog. He cannot really express his emotions, his feelings. He has been lying and raving all his life, so now he cannot be hysterical. And even more, I will say, even when we liberate Crimea, believe me, there will be no hysteria. His desire to be an aggressor and spoil not only us, but also Europe will not end. This creature is very pragmatic. This is a creature without an idea, without ideology, without any political views. It is not religious. He has some mystical notions, especially now, like Hitler at the end of the war. Therefore, I think you can't make a big show out of it. This is the hard work of ours and also of our friends. I think that this is not a goal, not an end in itself, a seizure. And we must assume that in this way we will save the lives of many of our soldiers and warriors. Then, we'll check how their border works. These are very good opportunities to check some of our intelligence data by actually making a small offensive. And then, presumably, it is possible to leave this territory as a buffer zone. Why? Because what kind of evacuation? As the authorities say, the people simply fled because there is no protection from His Majesty the President of Great Russia. Therefore, let's take a short pause here, discuss the issue and come back in a few days. I don't think anything unusual will happen. And we should expect that from the point of view of security, it is better to leave something there as a souvenir and move away. But if the Russians themselves, who are liberating the territory, decide to make it an independent People's Republic of Kursk, then we will not be against it. I think that the West will accept this with tension, but without any emotions. Why? This is the decision of the Russian people themselves, who are liberating themselves with weapons in their hands. Let's ask further questions. Valerii Stepanovich, an interesting analysis that definitely deserves a separate like from our viewers. Also, write right now in the comments your thoughts about the events that are now taking place in Russia. Regarding Putin, I suggest that we talk about it in more detail. According to your information, are there people in Putin's entourage who are now ready to organize a rebellion? I look into history again. In order to better assess the situation today, we need to look at the past. As one of our politicians said, it was the same. This is how we should treat today, and especially when looking at Putin. In Putin's entourage, there are almost people head and shoulders above him. Higher not from the point of view of physical, but from the point of view of intellectual, educational. His task is to make sure to lower and belittle them. And I see how much effort he makes to ensure that compromising information is created on everyone. Let's imagine. I have already said that for almost 30 years he had mentors, 90% of them were people of Jewish nationality. And that's enough. Well, I'll tell you, wherever they are, in a criminal environment or in a technical one, they always try to be the best.
И у него были наставники. 90% из них это люди еврейской национальности. А это в достаточной степени, скажу вам, где бы они ни были, или в преступной среде, или где угодно, в технической, они всегда стараются быть самыми лучшими.
And just imagine, in the image of what happened to Nicholas II from his dynasty, he mocked the Jewish people so much that young people rushed to become murderers. True, they later paid for it themselves, when a certain purely Russian man, Joseph Vissarionovich, came, and he sent them all to the next world. So, unfortunately, Putin expects that he will send them. You know, there are a lot of people among him who are already becoming dissatisfied. Take, for example, Ionovich Liza, Sviatsov and others in the other world. Putin saw him off to the next world when he returned from his second trip, a total of 20 years.
Путин проводил его на тот свет, когда он вернулся после второй ходки, после второй десятки, в общей сложности 20.
It seems that in 1992 Putin was already a fairly well-known person in St. Petersburg. He was already in the team. You know, he thanked his commander, mentor, but he made an effort to pass him away. And Usvetsov died in one of the shootouts, and Putin already had influence on all the groups at that time. In 1994, Putin paid tribute to him and erected a monument to him at his own expense. And now think about it. If Putin erected the monument at his own expense, moreover, he left his family a lot of money, who could write any epitaph on this monument. I'll let you read it, and you'll see who Putin is, a man without principles. So, Sobchak, Narasov's mentor and Kasyusha, do you think they don't know that Putin killed their dad and sent him to the next world? They play with him, they are not like Putin, wooden. Further, Kovalchuk is the one who was in the 90s, a real Stalinist, an elite.
Это вот тот, который из 90-х годов, настоящий сталинец, элитный.
NKVD parents from those times. It is elite. And he allowed Putin, it was he who set him up, not Dugin. He grabbed from Dugin, Putin, what he needed. Do you think Kovalchuk is interested? He became a billionaire with such difficulty, being some kind of scientific and technical worker at an institute and suddenly the richest man. And what do you think, Israel, Srul Solomonovich, is Seryoza Kerichenko, a friend of Nemtsov, who came, why is he so stupid? No, there is still a lot of pedigree from his parents left in him. He is playing with Putin. Next, we look. Do you think that Chubey, one of the mentors, just disappeared alive? No, I think they continue to play. And here it seems to Putin that at the expense of his entourage, bodyguards, such as Krasikov, he will survive, fly to the bunker, do something else. I think that thanks, among other things, to the West, as you know, more than 1 billion has already gone. Precedents have been set today, and I have information that we have just a few minutes left before the end of our broadcast. I agree with Budanov, he doesn't say everything. I'm just an analyst today, and I think that's the way it is.
Я соглашусь с Будановым, он не все говорит, Я сегодня всего лишь просто аналитик. Я думаю, так оно и есть.
Putin is in a very bad situation. Maybe the law. Valerii Stepanovich, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your answers, for your incredibly interesting conversation.
How do the fighting in the Kursk region affect the rise in gas prices? What is happening with the yuan famine in the Russian Federation? Not only with this, but also with a shortage of personnel, as well as with meat and food products. Irina Uzlova, my name is. With us is Ihor Vladimirovich Lipsits, Doctor of Economics and Professor. Ihor Vladimirovich, welcome to our broadcast. Glad to see you.
Good afternoon.
Gazprom said that the events in the Sudzha area, which is located in the Kursk region, led to a sharp increase in prices for both natural gas and LNG. And they also wondered who benefits from this. Of course, we are not from a political science point of view, but from an economic one. And where do you think they are looking for Gazprom beneficiaries? And what is the direct impact on natural gas and LNG prices that the events in the Kursk region have?
Well, it's not very strong. After all, the volume of supplies through this trade pipeline is not very large, so we are rather witnessing a kind of speculative game. It always happens, the markets are all behind speculation. This is an obvious story, a game on expectations, on fears, on small fluctuations. This is always normal, and part of the market economy cannot be otherwise. Therefore, there was a situation of reduced supplies to a number of European countries. A game was immediately played to increase the price of gas. After a while, this will calm down, but it cannot affect much, because there are quite a lot of gas suppliers to Europe. Both the United States and Qatar supply. In this sense, as they say, it will be possible to replace the small mass of gas that will not be supplied to Europe quite quickly. And this, in general, is not a big problem. But sir, speculatively, someone will make money on this, because for some time the price will jump, and it will be possible to get more money. That's all.
Specialists from the Berlin Center for the Study of Russia and Eurasia of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, in particular Sergei Vakulenko, explain that in fact, the Sudzha gas station is a kind of gas customs, and the only currently operating route through which all pipeline gas from Russia to Europe passes through it. And I also read that it is already in full.
Just look, this gas is already going to a very limited number of countries. Yes, this is practically Hungary, Slovakia and Austria, which, by the way, has already announced that by 2027 it will completely abandon Russian gas. Well, it's like another piece that exists. I have already said that this is part of the market, it exists, but it is no longer dominant, it is no longer the main one. Well, of course, it covers part of the balance, and it is clear that the situation with an unexpected reduction in supplies causes an urgent increase in prices, which then stabilize quite quickly. Yes, of course.
And by the way, Hungary and Slovakia, watching the events around the Sudzha gas station, can this somehow affect their motivation to abandon Russian gas or not? And what factors can change their decision in general?
Well, of course, they would like to get cheaper raw materials. Any country strives for its own benefit. Of course, for Hungary, Slovakia and, in general, for Austria, the opportunity to receive cheaper gas is a pleasant option. But it is clear that they have already begun to rebuild. I think Hungary will do it faster than Austria, although they will all have to rebuild. Maybe with grumbling, maybe with anger, but you have to. Of course, they will be angry with Ukraine. Perhaps there will be attempts to reduce electricity supplies. But as far as I looked, Ukraine is not the dominant supplier. So, in general, there will be no terrible disaster. And the fact that Russia is finally cut off from the European market can be seen as a symbolic completion of the process. And the process is completed, and it can no longer be reversed. In recent days, I have been talking about a very interesting material that has been published in Russia. This is a report by the Institute for Energy Strategy and Energy Research of the Academy of Sciences, dedicated to the future of the Russian energy complex. And it made a rather harsh conclusion that Russia will never in its history return to the income that it had from the export of oil and gas. Everything, as they say, her best days are gone, the best gold money. The golden rivers that flowed to it have passed, they will never flow in such a volume again.
Yes, and in general we learned the other day that the gas monopoly Gazprom continues to lose money. In the first 6 months of this year alone, it lost $5.5 billion to 486 billion rubles. To what extent are these also indicative figures and rates?
This is a serious topic, because, in fact, Gazprom already had a loss of 680 billion rubles at the end of last year. This year, he is predicted to lose 1 trillion rubles, and this is quite likely. We are discussing the figures for the first half of the year only, and the report for the second half of the year is still ahead. Well, in general, the picture is quite difficult. Gazprom has practically become a loss-making organization. It is time to discuss the topic of the need for subsidies for Gazprom so that it can continue to exist, because if it is unprofitable, then it eats up its capital. It is not a never-ending process, and eventually it must cease to operate, as there will be no funding to continue its activities. And this, as you understand, is a disaster for Russia, including just an ordinary domestic disaster. Therefore, of course, the state will have to, along with the costs of the war, find money to finance Gazprom's losses. It is not Gazprom that feeds the state, but the state will try to pay off Gazprom's losses from some income that it takes from who knows where, apparently, while there is still oil. This is an absolutely insane story, because Russia has undermined its entire economy, the entire basis of its economic revenues, the entire basis of budget revenues. And this is the trouble that was obvious. We, economists, talked about it, but many in Russia laughed at us, claiming that we tell horror stories all the time, and that everything in Russia is normal and nothing bad will happen. Now we see that the leading companies that brought huge revenues to the state budget are becoming unprofitable, asking for subsidies. In fact, we see that economic growth in Russia has stopped. In general, everything, as they say, all the reserves of power and stability of the economy are completely eaten up already in the third year of the war.
And what kind of bowels will now need to be scraped to make up for the lost income, or no resources will help?
Tough question. There is not much left of everyone, Irina. In fact, the National Welfare Fund is almost completely depleted. Apparently, by the end of the year there will be less than 4 trillion, perhaps closer to 3 trillion. This, in general, is a penny by the current standards of the Russian economy. This means that money is taken away from the regions, and at the same time the regions are even forced to pay more for conscription for war. And the regions are already unprofitable. We have more than 60 regions out of more than 80, they are unprofitable. They live on money from the federal budget, which is thrown into poverty. So you can't really walk around here. In general, it turns out that you need to take away from your own citizens and from business. Therefore, if you know, Russia has approved a tax reform that will come into force next year. This means that they will begin to take away more profits from business, and from 2026 more money from the population. Duties on imported goods are also sharply increased so that people pay higher prices for imported goods from their incomes. Now, I think, 26 commodity positions have been raised, commodity groups have been raised. The duties are quite substantial.
56 I thought that imported goods, you wrote, Igor Vladimirovich, are not a consumer item, but a luxury. You need to memorize. 56 product groups.
The Russians are out of the habit of such a situation. This was the case in the USSR. Imports are a luxury, and domestic goods are a normal ordinary basket. And now imports are becoming a real luxury. They are very expensive. Look at how car prices have changed. Even Chinese cars have risen sharply in price and become unaffordable. The same thing happens in other markets. Wine, cosmetics, whatever you want. I'm not even talking about medications. This is generally a terrible topic. It's even creepy to discuss it, since we are talking about the life and disability of people. Well, in general, this is what is happening. And then, if this money is enough, there will be the last reserve. This is an increase in the scale of money emission, that is, the issuance of a huge amount of unsecured, uncovered, meaningless money. That is, this is an instant increase in inflation rates to double-digit, and maybe even 3-digit values. This also began to be discussed among Russian economists that we can play to triple-digit inflation. And, accordingly, the last reserve is the deprivation of the population's savings. This is also happening. Part of the process has already begun. The population, in their stupidity, succumbed and began to transfer money to the so-called voluntary additional pension insurance. This money does not go to state pension funds, but to private ones, which use these funds to buy bonds of the Ministry of Finance and direct the money to the war. That is, if you had money in the bank, how could you hope that your bank is more or less stable? you will return the money. And now you have given the non-financial processing. The non-financial processing has given to the state, and in this case the guarantees are much weaker. Although the non-financial processing also seems to be guaranteed by the state, but we remember the 98th year, the state said, sorry dear, that's it, cancel your obligations and walk as you want. We remember how a lot of banks collapsed then, in 1998, and the Russians lost huge sums on this banking crisis. That's about where Russia will go now.
Yes, it is already characteristic of Russians to deceive themselves to their detriment. There is little to be surprised about. Speaking about the increase in duties on imported goods, we understand that duties are growing by 35%, even on shaving foam, creams, shampoos and toothpastes. And what should an ordinary consumer do? Go stock up on soda, you can brush your teeth, probably, and, in principle, you can wash in river water. Or where to find money for this now? Will they be lying on the shelves or, perhaps, their number on the shelves in Russian stores will simply decrease due to the insolvency and inability of Russian buyers to buy these goods, which will rise in price.
They will try to switch to domestic, cheaper ones. What quality is there? We will not discuss. After all, come on, you can brush your teeth. Soda and iodine are such an ancient mechanism. Those who don't know always combine very well. Then first you anoint your teeth with iodine, and then you take soda on a brush and brush it. A very nice option. Well, as they say, if you don't have a coat of arms, they will write in plain language. They will reduce the quality. I have been talking about this for a year and a half. Russia will not collapse instantly, but the quality of life of its population will steadily deteriorate. People will get poorer and move towards a poor country like Iran. Let me remind you that Iran is formerly one of the richest and most endowed countries in the world in terms of oil and gas reserves. But after 40 years under sanctions, Iran has become a third world country that has lost all its culture and civilization. Young people are leaving, a lot of people are leaving the country because there are no prospects. But the Russians are waiting for the same story.
But, you know, in Russia they have found another method to improve everything today and make sure that everything goes according to plan. Telecom operators were required to provide data for the complete blocking of YouTube. In Russia, preparations have also begun for the blocking of WhatsApp. This is only for today's news, we will not repeat the rest. Those who watch us think you also know all this in the know. Well, the slowdown, by 70%, and then by 170%, apparently YouTube, is happening in the Russian Federation. I had a conversation this week with Mikhail Klimarev, the head of the Internet Protection Community, Russian opposition IT specialists who, in particular, are working to ensure that sanctioned goods from private firms do not enter the Russian Federation and have helped slow down technical access to YouTube for Russians. And he says that Russia will lose about $23 million a day in terms of the economy and work related to YouTube if they do go for a complete lockdown. And how big will the losses really be and which sectors of the economy will suffer first?
Well, look, even this cannot be assessed so immediately, because look, we do not really understand all the consequences. There was a pretty funny story. They started slowing down YouTube, and even their RuTube crashed. Well, there is a funny story there. This is about the qualifications and outstanding abilities of Russian technical specialists working for the state. Therefore, the consequences will be manifold. We have already seen various attempts to block and slow down, after which government services crashed and networks created by companies stopped working. Everything is very intertwined. I'm not as good at these things, but I know that a lot of things are intertwined and sent through the same providers and data centers. Therefore, when some kind of blocking begins, quite unexpectedly, other systems can also crash. There have been so many stories when the fight against YouTube led to failures in the circulation of information between Russian banks. Therefore, only time will tell where what will come out. But it is clear that Russians are actually being driven into the Middle Ages, depriving them of access to information. I look at it with sadness. On September 1st, I begin to post a large training course on marketing on YouTube, but, apparently, it will be attended mainly by citizens of Ukraine. Now I have more students from Ukraine than from Russia. Russians will live in the dark. They have already been banned from using my textbooks, my lectures will not be available. The country is plunging into some kind of Middle Ages, going into archaism and, most likely, will not get out of there.
But still, both residents of Russia and entrepreneurs from there write to you and ask you questions. Apparently, the opposition-minded people are also active. This trend still continues. Are there any bright links there?
Well, people write, they tell me horror stories all the time. I say that I have become like a kind of duke of modernity. Of course, I do not compare myself with the classic, but people write because they want me to tell something. But unlike Herzog, I have my own fundamental differences. When the Duke published the next issue of the Bell, the Emperor was the first to read it. I cannot assume that my lectures and reviews are watched by Putin. So, in this sense, the quality of public administration in Russia, has deteriorated significantly. But people write and send small facts about how life is falling apart in this or that city and how this or that sphere is being destroyed. This is really scary, because although these events seem small, when there are many of them and they happen at the same time, you see a picture of a very strong decrease in the quality of life behind it. And especially in the regions. There is money in Moscow, and it looks like a shiny city in which there are no fires, on which drones do not fall. Everything seems beautiful, right? And in the regions, people, of course, already feel that life has become harder. Pensioners begin to write and say that this is how to survive. The pension there is 13 to 15,000 rubles a month, but the utilities have been raised, medicines have risen in price, food is becoming more and more expensive, and it is becoming more and more difficult to approach. And you can't buy anything for yourself or the cat, so how will we survive with the cat? You read and feel sorry for people, of course. To get into such trouble in old age is complete hopelessness.
And what other topics are now hurting Russians in the tangential economy?
There is a topic that worries me. It is not visible to most Russians, but experts notice it, and we begin to worry nervously. The situation is as follows. The state is trying to close the budget deficit by borrowing money from banks and selling federal loan bonds. However, banks are afraid to provide the state with large sums and require high incomes to compensate for the risks. This means that the Ministry of Finance is forced to do this. And so I will try to explain. So the yield on bonds, that is, what the state has to pay in the form of interest on borrowed money, has reached about 16% per annum. Well, it seems not to be scary. But the fact is that the profitability of Russian business means buy profit. This is 13.5%. If you have the opportunity to buy a bond with a yield of 16% and invest in your business with a yield of 13.5%, then don't be stupid, don't invest in your business. If possible, roll it up, take all the money out of it, invest in a bond, lie down on the couch, spit at the ceiling, watch TV and do nothing. You fire people, close the company, and money flows from the Ministry of Finance. And you know what? This is 1997-1998, when there was a similar situation with state treasury bills, and it ended in Russia with the default of 1998. Again, a situation arose when the state began to compete with the economy for funds, offering such high incomes that it would be foolish to invest in business if it was easier and easier to make money on government bonds. In Russia, the same story is now beginning. Again, the state becomes a more successful competitor to investments in state, that is, in all economic activity. And again it becomes more profitable to buy bonds, rather than develop a business, not to maintain employees, not to produce products. There are risks there. And here you lie on the couch and watch how the money ticks, and drips, and melts. That's the trouble. This destruction of the economy is very dangerous. The state destroys the economy in order to cover the expenses for military purposes with money. This is what scares me very much in Russia today.
How long should it gain momentum and become tendentious for a default to approach?
Well, look, everything is not so simple there. If we consider the approved draft budget of Russia for 2024, 2025 and 2026, where the budget is approved for a 3-year rolling period, then already in 2026, with the same cost of borrowing and cheaper bonds, about 10% of budget expenditures should have been spent on servicing the public debt. And this already means that the situation in Russia is beginning to approach a situation where the state will pay more for servicing the public debt than attracting money. That is, it is already a kind of pyramid situation. It is not yet a complete pyramid, because some money comes for oil. But if this situation is superimposed on the fall in oil prices, and on the other hand, The cost of fulfilling obligations on previously taken borrowings increases, then an extremely unpleasant situation may arise. Only a lazy analyst from this market does not write today that the price of oil may fall, because the situation on it is far from the best for Russia.
And how much can the price of oil fall and in what future?
The most gloomy forecast for the price of oil that I have come across over the past month is the pessimistic scenario of the International Energy Agency. According to their expectations, in the worst case, the price of Brent oil could fall to $55 per barrel. And Brent oil, as you remember, is more expensive than Urals, therefore, this will mean that the price of Urals will drop to about $50. At the same time, all budget expenditures are calculated based on revenues generated at the price of Urals at least $70. Even if the price of Urals drops to $60, there will already be a deficit that will not be covered with, and in this case it will be necessary to withdraw funds from the population. Well, support the war, support the president, give the money.
You have to pay for everything in this life. We always repeat it, everything goes in circles. It all comes back to going into the last pockets, the holy pants, and not only taking away, but leaving them with nothing. Thank you very much for this conversation. I am always glad to talk to you. Thank you.
Take care.
Goodbye. Ihor Vladimirovich Lipsits, Doctor of Economics, Professor. My name is Irina Azlova.